Today we're going to be talking about bar graphs and histograms. This is from Laying the Foundation. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the difference between categorical data and quantitative data. Categorical data, it consists of observations. So we've talked about observations as things that you can see or you can definitely separate into different categories. Examples of this would be types of automobiles, or states of birth, favorite sports. Those are things that you could list at the bottom of a graph that would be written in word form. Quantitative data consist of observations with number values. So those would be units. You would have numbers associated with them at the bottom of your graph. So examples of this would be like prices of gasoline, heights of buildings, ages of your classmates in months, the sum of something. So we're going to move down here to number 1, and based off these different definitions, we're going to determine if they are categorical or if they are quantitative. So favorite pets. If we took a poll of the classroom and we'd said, your favorite pet is a dog, or your favorite pet is a cat, or your favorite pet is a rabbit, and then we listed all of the individuals that was their favorite pet, we could make a graph of that. So that is going to be categorical. On the next one, it's number of text messages. So if I asked every student in this classroom to open up their cell phone and count the number of text messages they had, we could make a graph of that. So that is going to be quantitative. The next is height in inches. That is going to be numerical as well, so that is also quantitative. Birth in months. So because our months are going to be separated in categories, that is going to be categorical. Now, area codes, even though they are numerical, you are not counting them. You are just assigning them a number. So it would basically be like, I could ask the class, how many students live on this side of Albertville where the address ends in a 0, or the zip code, area code ends in a 0, or how many students live on this side of Albertville where your zip code ends in a 1. And then we would separate the classroom into 2 different sections. So that is also categorical. All right, moving down to the bottom, or on this number 2, the first thing says 30 middle school teachers respond to this question. Do you prefer to watch football, basketball, or baseball, basketball, soccer, or none of these on TV? The partially completed frequency data table displays the data from this survey. Is this data categorical or quantitative? Explain your answer. So this is going to be categorical because, one thing, it's observations. We are not specifically listing number values. It's also able to be sorted into unique groups. All right, on the bottom down here, we're going to try to finish up these data tables. So it shows our tally marks. So what we're going to do is we're just going to count the tally marks to determine the frequency. So once we finish counting these, we see that there are 16 tally marks. On baseball, there are 3. The frequency is 3. On basketball, there are 7 tally marks, so the frequency is 7. On soccer, there are 4 tally marks, so the frequency is 4. And on none of these, the frequency is 0, so there will be no tally marks. So we are done with number 2. So let's flip it over and look at number 3. So number 3 says, before making a bar graph of the data, answer the following questions. A. How many bars should be placed along the horizontal axis? What is an appropriate label for the horizontal axis? All right, so remember, we're looking at these. So when we talk about horizontal, we're referring to side to side. That is horizontal. So we want to know which data is going to be plotted on our horizontal axis and how many of them are there. Well, we know that we are plotting our categorical data. So we're going to plot football, baseball, basketball, soccer, and none. So there are 5 categories that we have to graph on our data table or on our graph. So the answer to how many bars should be placed along the horizontal axis, that answer is 5. The next one says, what is the appropriate label for the horizontal axis? That would be the types of sports. Because we're trying to give our title to our horizontal axis. Now, the title is not listing all of the different things. We're going to come back and do that. The title is just the overall idea of what that axis is about. B says, what is the maximum frequency? So looking at our data table, we see that the maximum frequency is 16. So that is our first answer for the maximum frequency. Then it says, what is the minimum frequency? So we can see that our minimum frequency is none of these, which is 0. So that's our answer for the second part of B. On C, it says, what scale is needed on the vertical axis? Now, when we talk about a vertical axis, we are talking about going up and down. So vertical is up and down, and horizontal is side to side. So the scale that we need to determine the vertical axis, it may vary. So it may vary depending on how you decide to figure this out. The easiest way to do this would be to find a good round whole number that you could make your whole scale out of. So looking at our maximum and our minimum frequency, we know that we're going to start our scale at 0. So our start is 0. Then we're going to go, we could go up to 16, but it would be difficult to determine our scale. So the easiest way to do that is going to be to go up to 20. Once we go up to 20, it's easy to divide those benchmarks. Now, when I'm talking about benchmarks, I'm talking about these little hash marks that are going to go along the side of your graph, the vertical side of your graph. So the easiest way to divide that out would be to increase by 2. Now, you could have went up to 16, determined how many hash marks you have, and then divide 16 by that number and graph that. But because doing a large whole number is going to be much easier and just going up by 2 increments, that's what we're going to do. Now, on D, it says, what is the appropriate label for the vertical axis? So we've already labeled our horizontal axis with the type of sports. So now we want to know what our vertical axis is going to be. So we know that the teachers are the ones that are being tallied. So that is going to be our appropriate label for the vertical axis. It's going to be the number of teachers. Now, we gave a title to the horizontal axis, which is the type of sports, and the vertical axis, which is the number of teachers. Now we need to give our entire graph a title. And that's going to go up at the very top. So the title is going to go at the very top of your graph, and it's going to be underlined. So we need a title that sums up everything that our graph is about. So we know that these are preferences of different sports that are being watched on TV. So that is what I'm going to title my graph as. Preferences of watching sports on TV. Because that sums up what my vertical and my horizontal axis is saying. On the next line, we're going to actually graph our data. So we need to make sure that we have our title right here. So our title goes here. Down here on our horizontal axis, we need to have the title down here for our horizontal axis, which was types of sports. Then we need our title for our vertical axis, which is number of teachers. And remember, we had our preferences, and I'm going to sum this up. I'm going to just put pref, because we know that our title goes here, and that's what our title was. Now, on the bottom down here, we need to determine what each line is going to be. So, as you can see here, I've already created this one. We have all of our different sports. I have went up by 2s on our increments on our scale all the way up to 20. I have drew my bar graph and spaced them out evenly. That is very important in a bar graph. Now, when we come back and we talk about histograms, that's going to be completely different. But for a bar graph, you space out your bars completely evenly. And you put them directly above whatever category you're discussing. So we are finished with that bar graph. So now let's go down and answer B on this section. It says select one of the bars from the graph and interpret the meaning in the context of the situation. So that question is kind of confusing. But all it's really asking you to do is to look at a specific bar and discuss what you think that bar means. So, by looking at the very first bar, we know that these are the teachers that preferred watching football. So that's going to be our answer. So our answer is there are 16 teachers that prefer watching football on TV. So that's our answer. Now you could have chose any of those. You could have chose the soccer one, and you would just discuss the frequency of how many teachers prefer watching soccer. On C, the question says rotate the frequency table counterclockwise 90 degrees. So we are taking our graph and we are rotating it 90 degrees. So it looks like this. And it says compare this to the bar graph. Notice the similarities between the bar graph and the frequency table. If you have been given the bar graph without the data, could you have created a frequency table? Explain. So here is our frequency table. We have our different categories on our vertical line, and we have our scale on our horizontal line. We still have titles, and we still have an overall title.